welcome everyone to today's town hall, the first town hall of 2024. As you will recall, we're doing a different format this time in that we're having a fireside chat in the second half of the hour where I'm going to talk to our new Vice President for Communications and Public Affairs, Pedro Ribera, and he and I will have a conversation and there will be a chance for you to ask questions. The first half of our time together will be focused on ops and comms, and in particular, our global rebrand. I do have a couple of quick announcements to start. First, I would like to wish everyone a happy year of the dragon. Second, I wanted to continue to send our prayers and thoughts to our colleagues and friends in Jerusalem during the continued conflict there. And finally, I also want to take this opportunity for all of us to recognize our friends and colleagues in Rome. Their work a couple of weeks ago in hosting the Board of Trustees for their winter meeting was nothing short of superb. So if you could all join me in using an emoji or giving a silent clap. So as I said, thank you again to our colleagues in Rome for your excellent work in hosting the Board of Trustees. Everyone had a role in that. And the comments from Board of Trustee members that I've talked to, as well as from the provost and the executive officers have been outstanding. So thank you for carrying the banner for all of us in your excellent work hosting. With that, I'll turn it over to Reagan and Joe and Maggie and Corey, as they will be leading the first half of the hour. Thanks.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So I'm Reagan Jones, Senior Director for Global Operations. And so among various responsibilities, it's a joy to provide leadership and support our global communications team. And so we collaborate closely here internally with colleagues across the academic enterprise in South Bend and communicators here internally. But importantly, we coordinate and extensively with our network globally as well. And so our goal is always to ensure that the university's global messaging is impactful. And the conversation today, the first part of the Global Town Hall, will be around global rebranding. And I know for many of you, I'm looking at the various, all of your lovely faces, that for many of you, this is not a new conversation. And to just give you a sense of our process and approach with this discussion, it became a little more formalized in how we were thinking and talking about our global rebranding and how we present ourselves to the world in December of 2022 and January of 2023. So just over a year ago, we began a little more of a formal process in how we think about our global branding. And we were asking ourselves really three questions centrally. The first, how can our global rebranding or brand enhance the university's reputation across our international locations? The second, as stewards of the international ecosystem, or one of the primary stewards for the university of the international ecosystem, how can our global branding as an element of enabling element help us forge a network and create strong connections across a broad spectrum of worldwide connections? And then the third is, just given our position as a force for good, how can our branding reflect that deep concern for global issues? And so in March of 2023, so a few months into last year, guided by these questions, we began a series of iterative conversations, inclusive conversations about branding. And then, of course, Michael and his leadership decided to formalize this initiative as a global rebranding project. And so in support of his leadership and the global leadership team, we formed a global rebranding task force. And you're going to hear from many of those on the task force here this morning. And so this team includes representatives from the network here in South Bend, but from our global locations as well. So Corey and Diane in South Bend, Costanza in Rome, Joe in London, and then our communicators in the provost office, Kate Gary, who's our executive director of academic communications, April Toller, who is the director of communications for the Keough School of Global Affairs. And then, of course, our partners Notre Dame Creative, ND Creative, formerly known as Marcom, who are within the Division of Public Affairs and Communication. And so we'll hear more from Pedro, who leads that division, but that's where that team falls under. And so we also, you may hear us talk about a gentleman by the name of Mike Rowe. He's a Notre Dame alum, but he's had this really brilliant career in industry and in Hollywood as a writer. And so we've leveraged his deep expertise and understanding of the university's mission and work closely with him as we appreciate the work and admire the work that he's done in support of other academic units here on campus. And so we brought him into this task force and this rebranding conversation. And then, of course, our provost and academic leaders are fully supportive of Michael's vision and the task force efforts on your behalf. And so a fundamental element of our work and our processes as a task force is just to be really collaborative and engage stakeholders along the way, gathering insights to refine the creative process underway. And this is being done for two reasons. The one reason that, again, you're hearing more often is we want to think and act as one institution. But the second, really also very critical element to this is that the brand reflects your daily contributions in advancing the university's educational mission, the work that you're doing every day around the globe. And so that will lead to a more comprehensive and wholesome supportive plan that supports all of us. And so we've learned much throughout along the way. Two main points that we've learned that I want to highlight that we'll talk a little bit more in the first half of the town hall today is the first, the terms gateway and center. And so they have served us well for a time as we think about our global locations and where many of you are located. We've used the terms gateway and center to describe those locations. And so we just recognize that maybe that's a barrier, that it no longer resonates with our internal audiences, nor does it really translate well to our external audiences. And so as this distinction really between a gateway and a center remains unclear, as an element of our rebranding, we're going to shift the focus towards the global impact we aim to achieve, rather than focusing on explaining the differences between a gateway and a center. And so, we're going to be transitioning to Notre Dame and then location. And so I'll just give you one example, Notre Dame, London, right? And so that's a change that you'll see coming. The second, the term international. And again, that just has served us well. But upon further reflection and thinking about that and how it conveys more of a Cold War era emphasis on nation states and ideological divisions, global suggests a forward-looking perspective, emphasizing the interconnectedness and the need for cross-border cooperation to address shared challenges. And so, as such, we'll be transitioning from Notre Dame International to Notre Dame Global. This will be reflecting a broader shift in our engagement with the world. And then why global? Why now? You might be asking yourself. Well, it's interesting because the current moment kind of creates this unique and timely opportunity to transition to Notre Dame Global, lining perfectly with the broader strategic initiatives underway at the university. And so we as a division have worked hard, or our leaders have worked hard on a strategic plan that's already in place. Now we have this overarching university strategic framework and a global strategy under development. And so all signs are pointing to more global and a more global perspective. And so the shift to Notre Dame Global, it not only complements these strategic efforts, but enhances them. And I think, as we want to ensure that we approach our global engagement as fully integrated into the university's long-term goals, and by adopting that position now, we really position ourselves as a vanguard of sorts, advancing the university's activity globally. And the strategic alignment here underscores the importance of the global perspectives in helping drive that mission forward, making this an ideal time to embrace the global identity and transitioning Notre Dame Global. And so I recognize the team here recognizes that you likely have many questions. And so the global communications team's been preparing with great diligence for this conversation for over a year. Last fall, representatives from each global location visited South Bend, where we visited and shared research and developed a shared understanding. And those variety of viewpoints informed our approach, which informed a nuanced, adaptable approach as we think about ensuring the success of this rebranding project, ensuring a smooth rollout we anticipate in mid-April of this spring. And so I will now pass it over to Joe, who will talk a little bit more about our approach and methodology, and then the rest of the team present some examples of some mock-ups to help you better visualize the direction that we're headed.
Hi, everyone. So as Regan has outlined, we're transitioning from Notre Dame International to Notre Dame Global and moving away from the Gateway and Center language. This change isn't just about altering our name, it's also about redefining our identity and our vision for the future. As part of this, we're currently in the process of working with Mike Rowe, the messaging specialist, to craft a narrative and tagline which form part of this rebrand. So why is a narrative important, and why do we need to invest time and resources into crafting a story that encapsulates who we are and where we're headed? Firstly, a narrative is supposed to provide some clarity. It is a few paragraphs of text which serve as a guiding light, helping us articulate the reasons behind our rebrand, the values that drive us, and the aspirations we hold for the global division. Secondly, a narrative is supposed to create connection. By weaving together our history, our mission, and our vision for the future, we can show our stakeholders, students, faculty, alumni, partners, and beyond, why our work is important. We can invite them to become part of the journey and to believe in our vision and potential. Alongside the narrative, we're also crafting a tagline, a concise, memorable phrase that reflects the essence of who we are and what we stand for. And as you can imagine, that's not easy to define in a sentence. So I want to explain a little bit how a narrative could be used. Most importantly, I think it's used for internal communication, a narrative within NDG to align us all with the rebranding effort. It explains the reasons behind the change, the values driving the transition, and the vision for the future. We're hoping that this will foster buy-in, enthusiasm, and a shared sense of purpose amongst us. We also want to communicate a narrative in a consistent way to the rest of the ND community and beyond. Parts of it then could be used in a video, in press releases, website content, social media posts, and other communication channels to introduce the rebrand, then build awareness, and then engage stakeholders. The process so far, as Regan mentioned, has been collaborative. So as well as the task force, Mike has been meeting with different groups of you around the world to work toward a narrative that is inclusive of all of us. With that in mind, there's clearly no one size fits all. So once we have a firm narrative for NDG, Mike will go on to develop mini narratives for each location, reflecting the nuance of how we operate and creating something that resonates with each location's audiences. It's also clear that the university is currently actively working on its global strategy, and we expect that as the role NDG plays develops in line with the strategic framework, a narrative may adapt alongside this. We're currently in the process of refining our narrative and tagline, incorporating this feedback from the global leadership team. So while we're not yet ready to share the specifics, we're really excited about the progress we're making, and we look forward to sharing it with everybody in the near future. I'll pass it over to Corey now, who's going to show you some visual components of the rebrand.
Great, thank you, Joe. So last year, ND Creative, the core creative team at Notre Dame, released the newest iteration of the university's brand. The purpose of this was to elevate and distinguish the academic side of the university from the athletic side. As a result, Notre Dame Creative has given us access to a great deal of assets that we can now apply to our own branding and communication efforts. These resources can be found at onmessage.nd.edu and include the university colors, fonts, textures, graphic elements, and templates for print, digital, social media, photography, and more. For our colleagues who use Canva, many of these templates have already been adapted and uploaded to the Canva platform for us to make use of. The main lockups for Notre Dame Global and all our global locations will be very similar to what we've used in the past. These lockups are meant to refine, create consistency, and further simplify the array of logos we've used to represent our work in the past. Since the global gateway and center language will no longer appear in the lockups, Each global location will be provided with the university lockup, all versions of the Notre Dame Global lockup, and all versions of their location lockup. Additionally, all these resources will be accessible from the ND Global portal on global.nd.edu starting April 15th. Since it is recommended that the Notre Dame monogram be used to represent athletics, Notre Dame Creative has also provided us with new merchandising and social media lockups that represent the academic side of the university. We've also been working with ND Creative to develop a wide range of merchandising options for each of our global locations to use as they would like. These assets will also be available on global.nd.edu starting April 15th. To represent the global aspect of everything we do, ND Creative has developed a graphic element we call the globe ring. As you see here, the globe ring can be utilized in a variety of ways to emphasize various aspects of our brand. The globe ring can be adjusted to use different imagery, different messaging points, and can even utilize motion to further tell our story. And here are just a few more examples of how we can use this element to create consistency with a great deal of customizable options in the digital and social media graphics we develop across our location. Now that you've seen some of the brand elements that will be rolling out in April, let's hear from Costanza, who has been leading the marketing working group.
Thank you, Corey. Transitioning to Notre Dame Global will result in a number of changes from the communication standpoint. Just think of all the tools that we all use in our everyday activities in each of our locations, and how many of those currently refer to us as Notre Dame International. From external signage to printed materials to merchandise to stand-up banners, tablecloths, cups, and so on and so forth. Since we're quickly approaching the April 15th launch date, we have decided to divide the workload in two phases. For phase one, as many of you probably know after receiving a series of surveys and emails, we're preparing an NDG merch kit that every staff member around the globe will receive. This is just one way that we hope to create greater consistency, brand awareness, and an overall sense of pride as we transition from NDI to NDG. The kit will include new name badges as well as a couple of gifts that I'm sure you will all appreciate. In this phase, we're also working towards thinking and planning special gifts to be used for strategic partners of NDG around the world, as well as stand-up banners with the new NDG logo and each of our global location logos that can be used during a wide range of events. Phase two will be introduced after April 15 and will tackle everything that has not been covered during phase one. We will collaboratively work together in thinking and designing updated printed materials if necessary, and each location will be supported in upgrading their own merchandise using local vendors when appropriate. Updating these marketing materials will be one of the many steps we take as we continue to find new ways to connect with our internal and external audiences to communicate who we are and what we do. Now I'll pass it to Maggie and Caroline, who will be discussing the social media working group.
Thank you so much, Costanza. One way that we're looking forward to announcing our rebrand to Notre Dame Global is through our social media presence. This is an opportunity not only to reassess our platforms and best practices of social media use, but also to allow us to reintroduce ourselves to our digital audiences as NDG. Our collaborative social media working group, assembled for the rebrand, includes representatives from 8 different locations. We'd like to take a minute now to walk you through the major goals of our work approaching the rebrand. A major shift we are hoping to enact is an increase in consistency between social media accounts. As Notre Dame expands across the globe and our international presence grows, we want to present ourselves as one unified Notre Dame Global. By increasing cross-location content creation, discussing brand standards for digital copy, and using the new designs conceived by Notre Dame Creative, each location's socials will reflect the university as a cohesive brand. You can see here how one of our location social profiles currently looks. Compared to many of our other social profiles, you would notice a lot of variety. Here is also an example of what a new profile icon might look like. An idea of how to use our new Notre Dame global branding to bring social media profiles together aesthetically while maintaining creative freedom and individual identity for each location. Our social media working group will be working together in the coming months to refine these details of how the branding will be reflected across our platforms. This visual consistency will allow us to be recognizable as Notre Dame, both in our own locations, local communities, and worldwide online. Each country we have a presence in has something unique to offer, and we intend this new collaborative process to allow us to best represent these individual identities in a Notre Dame-centric context. Our newly revamped NDG social media presence will thus improve our digital relationships with both our Notre Dame family and our local audiences. Now Maggie will expand upon our work in the weeks leading up to the rebrand date.
Thanks, Caroline. So one of our short-term priorities for the social media working group is to create a calendar of content as we count down to the official launch of Notre Dame Global on April 15th. So just please note that these are not our official designs. We're starting work with the social media working group tomorrow. And these are just a mock-up for the purposes of this presentation. So 2 weeks ahead of the NDG launch date, we will start to tease the rebrand across all of our social media platforms. We'll use this opportunity to share the incredible work that we're already doing across the globe and to hint at an exciting announcement to come. So after we launch NDG on April 15th, we'll continue to post more location-specific content as our rebrand presents a really unique moment to reintroduce our global locations to new audiences. We look forward to working with each location to gather assets for this launch, whether that be photography, videography, copy for posts. We hope to create anywhere from 6 to 12 posts to encapsulate the core work and mission of Notre Dame Global and to express the ethos and identity of each of our unique global locations. So in the long term, the social media working group plans to aid all Notre Dame Global content creators, particularly those who are not in full-time communications roles. So easy apps like Canva have already helped us in this department, but we hope that we can further ease the upkeep of social media platforms through the creation of an NDG social media style guide with both general and location-specific information, tools, and assets. So along those same lines, the rebrand presents us with the opportunity to really focus our social media presence on those platforms that serve each of our locations best. So we can reach those audiences that we need to connect with to continue our amazing work and to expand our local presence. In today's social-first world, our social media channels will play a key role in the rebrand as the first point where many of our stakeholders will come into contact with the new Notre Dame Global brand. Our ultimate goal is to create content for social media channels that will direct our users to our websites, where they can learn in more detail about who we are and what type of work we do. So on that note, I'll now pass it off to Diane, who is leading the website updates.
Thank you, Maggie, and the rest of the comms team. For the rebrand launch in April, our websites will be modified slightly, but will look largely the same. ND Creative is working to finalize the newest version of the ND web theme, so they will not have the ability to redesign and rebuild our websites by the April launch date. What will change for the April date is all website titles will be updated to reflect the naming change as we see on this slide for Notre Dame International to Global. The Gateway Center sites will be changed to Notre Dame London, Notre Dame Rome, Notre Dame Sao Paulo, and so on. The use of the color bar will be replaced with the gold bar. The tertiary colors on the global sites will be replaced with either dark blue or one of the new secondary colors. The fonts that we currently use will be reviewed to make sure they are more in line with the ND web theme. Update website copy to reflect new taglines, headlines, and other branded language. These will be reviewed by each location before changes are made on the sites. And the update of the domain of international.nd.edu to global.ndu. All of that will be done in phase 1. For phase 2, the websites is a full overhaul for each one, which will entail revisiting the information architecture, designing new homepages, layouts, and content types. We will start with the global flagship site and along the way build out a plan for all of the global locations, plus study abroad, global engagement programs, and ISA. The expected start date for Notre Dame Global is June 1st, aiming for a go live before Christmas 2024. At this time, there's no firm timeline for the other sites, but they should move, they should move more quickly once the global site is done. We do anticipate involving each location or team in the rebuild of their individual site. If you would like to get a sense of the look of the new sites, check out webtheme.nd.edu. And as I mentioned earlier, ND Creative is working on some updates to the current theme, so our sites may end up looking a bit different than what you will see there. After the Global Town Hall, we'll be sending out a link to a Google form where you will be able to submit questions about the Notre Dame Global rebrand and can express your interest in attending a Notre Dame Global learning session. That's it for the rebrand updates, and we hope everyone is excited about the upcoming changes. I now pass it back to Michael for the next portion of the Town Hall.
Thank you, everyone. Before we move to the next portion of the town hall, I do want to take the opportunity to thank Diane, Maggie, Caroline, Costanza, Corey, Joe, and Reagan for presenting on this, and more importantly, for their leadership along with everyone's enthusiastic buy-in to this rebrand. It is so critical for us to move the university forward in our global identity. And making these changes may seem in some respects very small, but in other respects, it's quite revolutionary. And I want everyone in the division to understand that the goal of this rebrand is to celebrate our collective good work, to celebrate and reintroduce, as Maggie mentioned when she was talking about the socials, reintroduce who we are as a university on the global stage and showcase our talent in terms of our faculty, our students, and staff. So I thank you for this work. I think it's really exciting. I'm excited about the fresh look. I'm enthusiastic about the reception. I know my colleagues on the President's Leadership Council and in the Provost Cabinet are excited about this. When I've spoken to alumni about it around the world in my travels, they too are excited. Please continue to be as creative in this process as you can be, and let's get to this finish line of the new rebrand and launch us into the new campaign and into the new strategic framework with this new identity that reaffirms that we are stronger together. So thank you, everybody, for that. Pedro is now in the Zoom room. Pedro, are you here?
I am, and I've figured out how to unmute myself. So all these years of Zoom practice.
That's great. I'm going to give a formal introduction of you very briefly to the group, and then we'll have a very informal conversation, and then we'll open it up for questions. But I'm very thankful for your time today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Pedro Ribeiro was appointed Vice President for Public Affairs and Communications in October 2023. In this role, he provides strategic communications and government relations advice to the president and other senior university leaders, communicating about and advocating for the mission and priorities of Notre Dame. He oversees the offices of Public Affairs, Central Communications, and Notre Dame Magazine. He came to Notre Dame after serving more than 6 years as Senior Vice President for Communications for the Association of American Universities, a consortium of the nation's leading public and private research universities. He directed and coordinated AAU's public affairs, communications, and media relations activities, and staffed the Public Affairs Network constituent group. Before joining AAU, Ribeiro served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. In that role, he was senior advisor to the department's senior leadership on media, public, and employee engagement strategies. He also helped develop and manage the department's strategic engagement plans for complex issues in coordination with other departments and the White House. Please join me in welcoming Pedro to our town hall today. Pedro, you left Washington, D.C. to come to Notre Dame. That's a big change. Can you share with the group how you first learned about the position and what made you decide to apply?
So the funny story is I actually didn't apply. And I learned about it from Father John. So I think as many of you know, Notre Dame is the newest member, along with a few other institutions of the AAU. So the Notre Dame formally joined the AAU in the spring of 2023, the late spring, early summer. And as part of my role in that job was to engage university presidents. So I had the opportunity to meet Father John and chat with him a little bit. And I was actually on vacation a couple weeks later, and I get a phone call, and it's from the phone says, South Bend, Indiana. And I thought, well, it's probably, one of my new colleagues calling to ask a question, perhaps about some of the work we're doing on Capitol Hill. It was actually Father John. He said, look, would you be interested in maybe thinking about coming to work at Notre Dame? And I said, South Bend, Indiana. I hear it snows a lot there. And he said, look, before you say yes or no, why don't you come up and spend a day with me and my leadership team? And I obviously did. And I came up, and by the end of that day, I called my wife and said, I have to take this job. This is the right place for me. It's the right time. And this is the kind of institution that we should be dedicated to. And for a couple of reasons. I spent most of my career in federal service. And I always knew it was a calling for me. I'm not American by birth. I'm an immigrant. And I always felt like that was my opportunity to give back for all the wonderful opportunity that this country has given me. And so I always felt, federal service was something I loved. And not that I didn't enjoy working at the AAU. It's a great organization. It does good work. But that sense of service, that feeling of mission was missing for me. And I got that back in Notre Dame. I feel like what we are doing is something incredibly important. Our commitment to faith, our commitment to education, and those in the intersection of that is incredibly powerful personally for me. And that's why I'm here.
I appreciate that. I remember my own first day of conversations with leadership when I came to South Bend 7.5 years ago, or I guess at that point, 8 years ago. What struck you about the place? You had been, I don't know how much experience you'd had at Notre Dame beforehand, if you'd just only known it. Yeah, that's what I thought. So what struck you that made you actually then call your wife and say, oh my gosh, this is the right place?
So let's start with Father John. I know a lot of university presidents. I've gotten to meet a lot of them. I have a few that I consider good friends. I have never met a university president like Father John. It's never about him. It's always about the institution, the mission, and Holy Cross. The egoless leadership is stunning. Both him and Father Bob, who I've gotten to know over the course of the past few months, was a huge draw for me. The second, Michael, you mentioned a little bit of this. The leadership team here is immense. Michael, John McGreevy, Shannon Cullinan, Lou Nani, whose office is across the hall from me, Marianne Kaur. It is an amazing team of people. I mean, it really is. And like I said, I spent the past 6 years traveling all over the country, meeting the leadership of a lot of really, really prestigious universities. And I had yet to encounter a group like this, a group so deeply committed to the mission. But also, I had dinner with them one night, and I was just blown away by how close they are, how closely integrated they are as friends, as colleagues, and this once again, this sense of mission that they all had together was stunning for me.
That's great to hear. And I think that sense of the Notre Dame family, we often talk about that. And I think to an outsider, it can seem somewhat cliched or trite. But I think when you're actually here in the community, you do feel that. And I think you also feel that in our global network as well. You've been on the job now for a while, and everyone always uses the phrase drinking from a fire hose. I'm sure that that's true. But what are the first most important things you've learned in your new role?
Yeah, the fire hose analogy isn't even, you can't even describe it. I would say you have to drink from both of these lakes right here, because that's what it feels like certain days. What have I learned? To your point that it isn't a facade here, right? There really is this deeply held notion of faith and formation here that it goes to the core of this place. It's not just something we say. It's not just something up on the website, right? It is something really deeply held here, and people believe in it, right? I think you've got to kind of accept the fact, and you have to believe in it as well. And I think that's been important for me to kind of really kind of dive into that. So having spent the past 6, 7 years in higher ed, Notre Dame is a lot like other campuses, and it is also very different, right? We are, and I think John Merpivia likes to say this, equal to but separate and apart from. And I think especially about the Ivies, I spent a lot of time on Ivy campuses. One of the things I did at AAU is I started and then I helped run a large public opinion survey project that really focused on the public's opinion of universities. And I did a lot of work with our colleagues at the Ivies, really tracking kind of public perception of elite institutions. And so I got to go to a lot of Ivy League campuses. And Notre Dame, in many ways, is very much like them. In many ways, is very different. And you have to accept that. And I think I kind of knew that, but I hadn't really, really internalized that. But when I got here, that really struck me that it is very similar, but there is a vast gulf between the two. This idea of faith, I can see the basilica from my office right here, and that makes us. I mean, it makes us different. Separate and apart from, I think, is an important part of that phrase, and that I think I've been letting that wash over me quite a bit. That this place is special and different.
One of the things we were just talking about before you came into the Zoom room was about our own rebranding project. You and your team have been very supportive of us reinventing ourselves as Notre Dame Global. We've worked with many of your colleagues in that process. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about brand? I mean, you're talking about the Ivy Plus institutions being one way, Notre Dame being similar, but also apart from. How do you think of the Notre Dame brand, and how do you think of brand more generally as we go into this brand of ourselves?
So as I think about Notre Dame, I think of us, and I think that our positioning is we are the only faith-based institution in the AAU, and by definition, the AAU is the best of the best. And if you're the best of the best in the United States in higher ed, that means you're the best of the best globally, and we have to accept that. I think there's a certain humbleness at Notre Dame. And I say that, and people are like, oh, we can't possibly claim that. I said, yes, we can. But to be a member of the AAU is there are metrics that you have to meet. It's not like, like some of the rankings where people are voting on their perception of an institution. To be a member of the AAU, it's your research dollars per capita by faculty, citations per capita by faculty, right? It's all of that. It is a very objective set of criteria, right? It is not like the Times higher ed rankings where you just kind of vote. And, if your votes are high, then people think you're a great research university. And so there's some of that we have to really kind of internalize and say, no, we're the global leading Catholic research university, period, right? That's us. As the only institution of higher ed that's religious in the AAU, and as a Catholic institution, we have to claim that mantle, right? And so for us, as we think about your rebranding global, right? The global leading research university, right? That's part of this idea for the brand that is Notre Dame. And I think we have to own that mantle and really say, no, that's us. That's who we are. I think kind of more broadly, this idea that comparing and contrasting ourselves to the Ivy is something we're going to have to really think about. And how do we frame that? Not that, and I don't want to sound like I'm putting the Ivies down, because I'm not. You can get an amazing education at a place like Princeton, and Chris Eisgruber, the president of Princeton, is a friend and colleague who I think the world of. But we are different, right? We are a little different than they are. This idea of faith and formation that we have, and you can get a world-class Princeton quality education with this other piece, right? And it may not be for everybody, but it is what we do. And so it may not be for you, but it is what we do, right? And to really lay it out for people. And to be honest, it may not be for you, but it is what we do. It is to get that University of Chicago quality, that Princeton, Harvard quality, but with that other piece, that other dimension that we think at Notre Dame makes you more fulsome. And you don't have to be a Catholic to experience that. Obviously, we have people from all different faith traditions and no faith tradition here, right? But it is something that we do, and you have to be open to that. And I think we have to be honest with people about that and tell that story. This idea, and I've heard kind of people say, and consultants always telling, oh, you're going to minimize your Catholicism. Absolutely not, right? That's not who we are. We are a Catholic university. We are the greatest Catholic university in the world, in my opinion, and we're going to tell that story, and we're going to embrace that equal to, but separate and different from, right? I think that's incredibly important for us. That's our future.
I think that's really well said. And it's also a great ambitious goal for us to have, that owning it, embracing it, and telling that story both domestically and around the world, because I think there can be resistance to that. There can be ignorance about that. There can be uncertainty about that because we are apart from and different. But to own that and run with it and celebrate that, I think can be transformative for us as an institution. And I think it's also good to remember, as you said earlier, the humble piece is complicated, right? We are a humble institution, and yet we want to brag, but we don't want to be braggart-ly. And so we have this kind of love-hate relationship with telling our story. And I think you and I both agree we have to tell our story in as many ways as possible to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think you can do that. I think you can tell the story about the institution that we are without being braggadocious about it. But really, I think, for example, focusing on the faculty and telling the story of the world leading researchers that we have across the spectrum, right? Whether it's in the humanities, the social sciences, the STEM fields, which is something I think that people don't think of Notre Dame, right? When you think of Notre Dame, let's be honest, what do you think of? And I know because I'm a survey researcher, people are probably going to tell you what they're going to think of: football, undergraduate education, and touchdown Jesus, right? Like, I mean, right? That's they don't think of, okay, Mach 10 wind tunnel, which is just up the road from here, right? Like, they don't think about those things, even though we are the first place where a wireless transmission happened on the North American continent, right here. Like, that's not what they think of us. And so that is another part of the story that we really have to tell. And I want people to understand, we're not going to get away from those other things. Yeah, we are good at football. We are good at athletics. Yeah, we are a Catholic institution. Yes, we are for quality undergraduate education, but then we're also this other thing, which is we're also this amazing research university, right? That we are an R1, we're at the top of the R1 pecking order as well. And to add that layer to a really wonderful existing layer of story that we already tell.
I appreciate what you were saying about the wireless, because one of the stories I often tell, and people in the Zoom room have heard me say, is it's good to remind people of those historical facts that they actually don't know, because it does radically change how they see us. So I often mention the fact that in the first decade of the 20th century, our college bulletin was bilingual in Spanish and English. Most people have no idea that we had that many students from Mexico and Cuba that allowed us and made us think that it was, of course, natural and right to have a bilingual bulletin. And you can see that today in the archives. I think the more we can surprise people into getting to know a different side of us, the better we'll be. Tell us about what your priorities are for the first year.
Yeah, all of the above.
How many? I know, right? How long is the laundry list? I know.
So yeah, I mean, it's kind of all of the above, really. Honestly, my first priority is just to listen, right? When you come into a new institution, I think you have to be respectful of that institution. I think a mistake that a lot of communicators make when they come to a new, especially in higher ed, because higher ed is different, right? I'm not selling Ford, and I'm not selling, Procter and Gamble. I'm not selling toothpaste. So really coming in and listening and spending time with the deans, right? And with the different institutes, and really getting a really good feel for the institution and tradition. Tradition in higher ed matters a lot. And I think people make the mistake of not accepting that. Tradition at Notre Dame matters even more, right? And kind of really ensconcing yourself in the tradition of the place and really learning. I think that's step number one. And I've been spending a lot of time meeting with basically anyone who'll take the time to sit down with me, whether it's trustees or members of the Holy Cross, or kind of just getting all across campus. And I've met most of the deans already and had some one-on-one time with most of them, and really getting to know what their goals are, where they want to be, what spaces they're operating in, and really kind of bringing that back to OPAC and really learning that, I think is number one. I think number two is really figuring out, how do we integrate with the 2033 strategy? We've talked, I know you've talked a lot about that, but what's OPAC's role in 2033? I mean, some of it is pretty simple. Like, for the first time ever, we're talking a lot about South Bend. My office manages the South Bend Community Relations. And so we really have to think about what that looks like. But from a broader sense, how does OPAC ladder up to the 2033 strategy? How do we empower and what role do we play in telling that story and really thinking through what our strategic vision is as a department, I think is the second thing. And then I think the third thing is really getting out there and kind of beyond the campus community, but also kind of out in the world of higher ed and holding the Notre Dame flag a little bit. Having come from the AAU, that's an opportunity for me to be able to do that, and using my AAU connections to remind people that, hey, Notre Dame is now a member of the club. And it's an elite club, folks. I mean, there are only 69 AAU institutions in the US. There are 2 Canadians. That puts us in the same league as the entirety of the Ivy League, Caltech, right? UCLA, UC Irvine, UC San Diego. I mean, it's a pretty elite club to be a member of. And I think we have to figure out how we fit into that kind of in the higher ed ecosystem.
I'm looking at the clock. We have 12 minutes left. I would love to have people from around our global network ask you questions about your work and about OPAC's work and about your own personal background. If you have a question in the network, can you raise your hand using the hand function so I can see you, recognize you, and then if you could introduce yourself to Pedro and ask away. Joe, thank you for being the first brave soul.
Hi. So Pedro, I think we met briefly when I was on campus. I work as the Associate Director for Communications and Engagement in London. I had a question about engaging more external audiences and how you see the plan for that. Because I think when we talk about telling the ND story, we are actually really strong in that. I think we tell it really well, but often to the ND community. And we don't go much further than that, or we could be better in going further than that. So I wonder what your vision is for how you get that story more widely around the world.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things we have to do is we have to look at kind of the platforms we have. So I think let's just pick athletics, for example. Athletics reaches a lot of audiences, and how do we integrate telling our academic story through our athletics footprint? I think we could do a better job of that, for example. On the international side, which is, I think, getting more what you're thinking about, we don't have any bandwidth here at main campus to do that, for example. So that's something I've started talking about. So particularly as we think about places where the Catholic Church is, so the global South, right? A majority of Catholics are now going to be in the global South, and that's where the church is growing. How do we talk to those people? And we're talking predominantly, in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. And how do we have no capacity to do that because we don't have people with that experience here in-house in OPAC. And so how do we build that capacity? So that's something we're going to be looking at over the course of the next year or two. How do we build the ability to reach people where they live with the stories that matter to them? Right? The right story at the right time to the right audience. I think that's my mantra and has been for a very long time. So how do we talk to those people in a language they understand first and foremost, right? Like Michael, to your point, we actually don't do Spanish language anymore. We've lost that along the way. I don't know how or why, but we have to get back to that. And you look at some of those languages where the Catholic faith is growing. So, Portuguese and Spanish, I think, are incredibly important for us to think through how we do that. Now, that's not to say we're going to abandon the other places where we have been, right? That's who we are. That's part of our tradition. So it's not that we're not going to tell our story in London or in Ireland or in Rome, right? But to add that to the things we're already doing is incredibly important, and it's our future.
Thanks for the question, Joe, and the answer, Pedro. Other questions that people have? I will ask one as people are still thinking. You just mentioned about we don't have the resources to do that. I think that's probably music to people's ears that you are actively thinking about how to weave global into your organizational structure. So I just want to say thank you for that, because if we're not equipped to tell that story globally, there's an infrastructural piece. We can have the ambition to want to tell the story and want to reach more external audiences, but that means we actually have to invest in that. And I know you and I have talked about that in many a meeting before. So I appreciate your support and solidarity in that. Vittorio and then Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the comments, the conversation. It's quite inspiring, actually. So thank you very much. Following on from the conversation, thinking about, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on how to tell the story and how to engage as fruitfully as possible with non-Catholic audiences, and perhaps with audiences within, the elite academic sort of world that might think that because one is Catholic, one's academic work is almost necessarily not as good as in a secular university, for example.
That's a really great question. It's something I've spent a lot of time talking to John McGreevy, the provost, about, right? How do we highlight the success of our faculty and the work that they're doing beyond the things that people already expect that we're doing, right? Like a Catholic theologian writing, right? Like, how do we do that? That's another part of where we have to create some bandwidth and really create this opportunity to talk to faculty. And honestly, if we're really going to live up to the global leading Catholic research university, that means we have to go hire the best faculty from around the world, right? And convince them to come here. So we've got to be talking to that audience. And that's something we've given a lot of thought about, whether you're Catholic or not. How do we talk to a faculty audience, an academic audience, to convince them that Notre Dame really is this, AAU level institution and not this parochial backwater that I think some people still have lodged in the back of their mind, which is not true, right? We know that. But how do we reinforce that? I think part of it is telling the story, but telling it specifically to that audience and highlighting the work that our faculty, who are amazing, right? I mean, we have some amazing faculty across the disciplines, whether it's in the STEM fields or in the humanities or in the arts. We just have to tell that story. That's a place where I'm not sure we've really focused on delivering that message to that audience in a strategic sort of way, right? You can say you do it and you can kind of do it, but what are the tools we're doing? Are we, for example, one of the things my office has been thinking about is helping faculty prepare to be on social media, formalized training, right? How do you do your LinkedIn? What stories do you post on that? Do we help you prepare content? We've actually started thinking about doing these 30-second commercials for faculty, where as a faculty member, we would record you, we would help you, and we would basically produce a commercial for you that you could use on social media about your work. It could also be helpful. You can include in grant applications and things along those lines. Novel, thoughtful sort of ways about how do you engage faculty in the storytelling. It's going to be incredibly important for us to achieve that goal, right? How do we go hire the best, Catholic or not? I think the other thing, which is, and I was just talking to some colleagues back in Washington, the idea of telling the Catholic story is important for us. But that being said, Notre Dame for a very long time has been one of the most welcoming institutions to people of the Jewish faith. And that's a story that hasn't been told a lot. But how do we tell that story? I was actually talking to some colleagues who work with the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, about making sure that people understand that going back as far back as the 1860s and 1870s, when Jewish students weren't welcome in other places, they were welcome at Notre Dame. And how do we tell that story and make sure that that's a more fulsome representation of who Notre Dame is?
Thanks for that. Reagan, you get the last question.
Hey, Pedro, great to see you. Thank you. You have an incredible story, and we're lucky to have you here at Notre Dame. Just a question, a little bit about how we think about our process and our approach to communications. I mean, we do have capacity and expertise to think about global audiences that maybe can complement the work that you're doing within OPAC. But as we think about content and channels and platforms, sounds like data and research are important to you. You'll hear sometimes people say we want to pump out stories, and so I guess I'm just interested in hearing a little bit about your approach and some advice you might have for us as we think about this in the context of this rebranding, but also reaching the audiences we intend to reach to really move the needle.
I think to your first point, I've already seen firsthand the amazing expertise that you all have. The Rome convocation was amazing, and the team in Rome did a phenomenal job of making sure that the Italian language media was all over it. And that was, I can only give kudos to that team. They did amazing. So I know firsthand how great the team there is, right? And I think that's true across all of the gateways. So trust me, a lot of you are going to get recruited to do a lot of stuff with helping OPAC. On the data side, for me, I always ask this question: the right story at the right time for the right audience, right? You can have great stories, but if those stories aren't connecting to the audience, what's the point, right? The tree fell in the forest, no one heard it. Did the tree really fall? You can tell a great story. If it doesn't get to anybody, what's the point, right? And so we need to ask ourselves, okay, do we have a good story? What audience wants that story, right? So opioids is a great example. We're doing a big campaign on opioids. What audience are we delivering that message to, right? People in the Midwest, predominantly, people in the Rust Belt, and governors and people involved in that kind of stuff. And then the right time. You have a great story, you have the audience, but if the time is wrong, if it's too saturated in the media market, then maybe perhaps not the right question. So we need to ask ourselves those questions and then figure out how do we do that. I'm a big believer in targeted digital. Um, we live in a world where Americans are consuming less and less of traditional media and really moving more towards the digital frame and being on social media. So how do we take those stories and deliver to them in a really targeted sort of way? It's actually not that expensive to do that. It's just if you're very thoughtful about saying, okay, we want to reach this audience, it's a small audience, but it's the audience that cares the most about this, we can engage on that. So really working through those questions, I think we can do amazing things working together, right? You got a great story. What's that audience? And then how are we going to deliver it to them in a consumable sort of way at the right time? Perhaps it's digital advertising on your phone, right? Maybe we're delivering, through athletics because we know that the story is going to resonate with that audience, is really asking ourselves that question and being very thoughtful about making sure we do that. So let's start with that first point. We have no shortage of awesome stories here, right? Like we know that. We just went through the What We Fight For kind of review for next year's What We Fight For ads. There's so much content there. It's really those other two pieces that we're going to work together on, right? What's that audience that you guys want to talk to?
Thanks a lot for that, Pedro. Diane, did you have a question to sneak in before the end or no?
No, sorry. If I raised my hand, it was by mistake.
No worries. Pedro, we are really grateful that you said yes to Father John. We're really grateful that you're here and strengthening OPAC every day. Please know that the entire division stands by ready to help you meet your goals and aspirations and be a good collaborator and partner. We already feel a great sense of friendship and camaraderie with your team. You have an excellent team, and we're really grateful for their support of us. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we can cook up together. Please join me in thanking Pedro for his leadership and his time this morning.
Thank you, guys. Look forward to working with all of you.
Great. Thanks, Pedro. Please, everyone, we're at the bottom of the hour and people have meetings and familial commitments depending on what time of the day it is. I am grateful for your work and your leadership as well. I do want to close by saying something that Pedro mentioned, which is that this sense of working together across different geographies to tell different stories that are all still the one same Notre Dame story. I had a senior leader at the university tell me yesterday that one of the things he's hearing from the division now in ways that he's never heard before is the way in which we're creating programs and partnering across our global network to create more impactful programs and to have a wider influence in the world. And that's really true. And that's all thanks to you and your creativity and your camaraderie and partnership with one another. So just as we work to be a better partner and collaborator with Pedro and his team, or with Notre Dame Research and their team, or whatever college and school we might be working with, I want to continue to encourage and exhort you, we collectively, to work across the network to build interesting programming around the world that nobody else can do because of the footprint we have and because of the leadership that you bring. So with that, have a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, and be well, and we'll see you soon.